The house on Sycamore Street stood as a quiet sentinel in Willow Creek, Oregon, its craftsman lines softened by 50 years of sun and rain, its wide front porch a gathering place for neighbors and their stories. Walter Harper, now 76, had spent half a century restoring every inch of the 1905 structure, with his calloused hands from the oak staircase that gleamed under afternoon light to the stained glass window above the landing, which cast kaleidoscope patterns across the hardwood floors. Evelyn, his wife of 52 years, had filled the house with warmth. Her herb garden thrived in the backyard, her quilts draped over armchairs, and the kitchen always carried the faint scent of cinnamon from her baking. Together, they'd raised 3 children within these walls: Michael, the steady firstborn who'd built a construction business in Boise; Sarah, their sharp-witted daughter, now a journalist in London; and Benjamin, the youngest, whose laughter had once echoed through the halls until a car accident stole him away 12 years ago at the age of 28. The folded flag from his memorial service rested in a polished cedar box on the mantel, a silent reminder of loss that never dulled. The house had seen it all: birthdays with homemade cakes, teenage arguments, quiet evenings when Walter and Evelyn sat on the porch swing, watching fireflies dance in the summer dusk. Neighborhood kids drawn by Evelyn's lemonade and Walter's knack for fixing broken toys had made the porch a summer ritual, their chatter a soundtrack to long golden afternoons. But time relentless, as the Oregon rains had begun to erode the edges of their idyllic life. 10 years ago, the first crack appeared when Sarah announced she was taking a job in London. "It's a chance to cover real stories, Mom," she'd said over a crackling phone line, her voice bright with ambition. "I'll visit when I can." The visits dwindled to emails, then occasional holiday calls, each one ending with promises of trips that never came. Evelyn would smile through the disappointment, saving Sarah's emails in a folder labeled "Our Girl," while Walter buried his grief in his workshop, crafting birdhouses for the grandchildren he rarely saw. 5 years later, Walter's hands, once steady enough to carve intricate dovetails, began to tremble with arthritis. He ignored it, just as he ignored the creak in his knees when he climbed ladders to clean gutters or patch the roof. "No sense paying someone for what I can do myself," he'd say, waving off Evelyn's protests. She'd shake her head, her silver hair catching the light, and mutter about his stubborn pride. But pride couldn't stop the fall that came last spring, when Walter, at 75, insisted on fixing a loose shingle during a drizzly afternoon. The ladder slipped on wet grass, and he plummeted 12 feet to the ground, his hip shattering on impact. The ambulance ride to Willow Creek General was a blur of sirens, and Evelyn's trembling hand gripping his. The hospital bill arrived a month later: $50,000 for emergency surgery, a titanium plate, 10 screws, and 6 weeks of rehabilitation. Their Medicare covered less than half, and their supplemental insurance lapsed after a premium hike they couldn't afford. On their fixed income left them exposed. "We'll manage," Walter insisted from his hospital bed, his face pale but resolute. "We always have." The medical debt wasn't the only blow. Michael's construction business in Boise had been struggling for 2 years, caught in the undertow of an economic downturn that gutted demand for custom homes. Orders dried up, subcontractors went unpaid, and the bank began sending foreclosure notices, not just for his business, but for the sprawling 5-bedroom house in Boise's upscale North End, where he lived with his wife Vanessa and their 2 children, Lily, 6, and Ethan, 4. During a tense hospital visit, Michael confessed the depth of his troubles, his eyes fixed on the floor. "The kids might have to switch schools," he muttered. "Vanessa's beside herself, says everyone will know we've failed." Evelyn, sitting by Walter's bedside, suggested the unthinkable. We could sell the house on Sycamore. It's too big for us now, especially with your recovery." Walter's jaw tightened, his eyes glistening for a moment before he nodded. "If it saves your home, son, we'll do it." The house, their anchor for half a century, sold within weeks for just enough to clear their medical debt and pay off Michael's mortgage. The day they signed the papers, Evelyn stood in her garden touching the rosemary she'd planted decades ago and whispered, "Plants can be moved." Walter, limping with a cane, packed his tools in silence. Each clank of metal, a farewell to the workshop, where he'd built cribs for his children and toys for his grandchildren. Moving day etched itself into their memories like a scar. Walter dismantled his workbench, each screw removed with deliberate care, while Evelyn wrapped her mother's china pieces that had survived countless family dinners. When she reached the delicate teacup her grandmother had brought from Ireland, her hands shook, and tears fell onto the bubble wrap. Walter found her sitting on the floor, cradling the cup. "This house has held our whole life," she said, voice breaking. He knelt beside her, ignoring the ache in his hip. "It's not the house that makes us Evie. It's us. We take that with us." Their golden retriever, Bailey, 10 years old and graying at the muzzle, sensed the upheaval trailing them from room to room as furniture vanished into the moving truck. When the last box was loaded, he sat in the empty living room, his whine echoing in the hollow space. "Come on, old boy," Walter said, patting his leg. "We're heading somewhere new." The somewhere new was Michael's guest room in Boise, a cramped space with a queen bed, a narrow dresser, and barely enough room to navigate. Their remaining possessions, photo albums, Walter's tools, Evelyn's quilting supplies, filled half the garage, labeled and stacked under Vanessa's strict instructions to keep things organized. The house itself was a modern marvel with granite countertops, a 3-car garage, and a backyard featuring a play structure and a fire pit. By any measure, it wasn't short on space, but Vanessa's welcome carried an edge from the start. Vanessa, a former real estate agent turned stay-at-home mom, greeted them with a practiced smile and a small housewarming dinner, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and a bouquet of daisies on the table. "We're so happy you're here," she said, her tone warm, but her eyes flickering with something less certain. Lily and Ethan, however, were pure joy, clambering onto Walter and Evelyn's bed each morning for stories or to show off drawings. "Grandpa, can you fix my toy truck?" Ethan would ask, holding up a broken plastic wheel. "Grandma, can we make cookies with sprinkles?" Lily begged, her braids bouncing. Those moments were lifelines, brief bursts of light, in a house that felt increasingly like a cage. Within weeks, Vanessa's demeanor shifted. Her comments, sharp and veiled, surfaced during meal prep or in passing. "I didn't sign up to manage a retirement home," she muttered into her phone, while slicing carrots, unaware Evelyn was in the next room. The armchair Evelyn had brought from Sycamore, a worn but comfortable relic, was banished to the basement to make way for a new sectional sofa. "We need space for entertaining," Vanessa explained, her smile tight. Walter's tools, neatly arranged in a corner of the garage, were boxed up and shoved behind Christmas decorations. "The kids need room for their scooters," she said, brushing off Walter's quiet objection. Meals became a battleground of passive-aggressive jabs. "Walter, help yourself to more. But my trainer says seniors should watch their carbs," Vanessa would say, her fork poised mid-air. Or to Evelyn, "I've switched us to oat milk studies. Say dairy's bad for memory at your age." Michael, caught in the middle, stayed silent, his eyes darting between his wife and his parents before retreating to his office or the basement where he'd tinker with half-finished projects to avoid confrontation. The children remained the bright spots. Lily would slip into their room after school, her backpack stuffed with spelling worksheets. "Grandma, can you help me with my words?" she'd ask, curling up beside Evelyn. Ethan brought broken toys or sticks he'd found in the yard, convinced Grandpa could turn them into treasures. Bailey, ever loyal, followed Walter and Evelyn everywhere, his tail wagging despite Vanessa's complaints about dog hair on her leather couch. "He smells even when he's clean," she'd say, wrinkling her nose. The tension escalated 3 months in when Walter, still adjusting to his hip replacement, tripped over a decorative rug Vanessa had placed in their room. He fell hard against the dresser, pain shooting through his leg. The crash woke the house. Lily peeked from her doorway, Ethan cried, and Michael rushed to help his father up. Vanessa appeared last, her silk robe pristine, her expression unreadable. "Is everyone okay?" Michael asked, steadying Walter. "I'm fine," Walter insisted, though his hip throbbed. Vanessa's lips pressed into a thin line. "This is what I worried about. Falls at night disrupting everyone. We all need sleep for work and school." She turned away, adding over her shoulder, "We'll talk about this tomorrow." The talk never happened, but the next day, Vanessa arranged for a senior safety consultant to assess the house. The consultant, a young woman with a clipboard, suggested motion sensor lights and grab bars, but also proposed restricting nighttime movement with a fluid management plan to limit bathroom trips. Or perhaps protective undergarments. Vanessa added her tone clinical, as if discussing Walter's dignity were no different from choosing paint colors. Evelyn overheard and felt her stomach twist. That night, Walter sat on the edge of their bed, his shoulders slumped. "I never thought I'd be a burden to my own son," he said, voice low. Evelyn touched his arm. "You're not a burden. You built this family, put Michael through college, gave him everything. If anyone's earned a place here, it's us." But doubt crept in a cold shadow over her resolve. The final straw came during a quiet evening when Evelyn, organizing their medications in the guest room, noticed something odd. Their bank statements, which Vanessa had offered to manage to ease their stress, showed withdrawals they hadn't authorized to hundreds here, $500 there, labeled as household expenses. When Evelyn confronted Vanessa, she waved it off. "You're living here rent-free, Evelyn. Groceries, utilities, the kids' activities, it adds up. I'm just keeping things balanced." The explanation didn't sit right, and Evelyn began watching more closely. She noticed Vanessa's new designer purse, the frequent deliveries of luxury skincare, the way she'd redirect conversations about money. Suspicion grew into certainty one night when Evelyn overheard Vanessa on the phone discussing their savings with someone she called our financial advisor. "Once we consolidate their accounts, it'll be easier," Vanessa said. "They don't need all that cash just sitting there." Evelyn's heart pounded as she relayed the conversation to Walter, who sat in stunned silence. "She's not just tolerating us," Evelyn whispered. "She's using us." Walter's face hardened. "We didn't survive 50 years to be pawns in our own son's house. We need to know more." They began listening more carefully, staying awake late into the night, ears pressed to the floorboards, catching fragments of Vanessa's plans, words like guardianship and asset management that chilled them to the bone. The house on Sycamore Street, with its creaking floors and warm memories, felt like a distant dream, now replaced by a reality where their own family saw them as obstacles to be managed. As Bailey curled up at their feet, his steady breathing a small comfort. Walter and Evelyn began to whisper about escape, their voices low but resolute. They weren't ready to surrender their dignity, not yet, not ever. The air in Michael and Vanessa's Boise home felt heavier each day, as if the walls themselves absorbed the tension that grew between Walter and Evelyn and their daughter-in-law. The guest room, once a temporary refuge, had become a claustrophobic prison, its narrow pathways hemmed in by a bed and dresser that seemed to shrink with every passing week. Walter, at 76, moved cautiously, his hips still tender from the fall that had upended their lives, while Evelyn, 73, carried a quiet vigilance, her eyes scanning for signs of Vanessa's next move. Bailey, their 10-year-old golden retriever, sensed the unease, his usual tail wags subdued as he trailed them from room to room, his graying muzzle resting on Evelyn's lap during late-night talks. The discovery of Vanessa's unauthorized withdrawals from their savings, $1,200 over 3 months, siphoned under the guise of household expenses, had ignited a spark of defiance in the couple. But it was the overheard conversation 2 nights ago that turned that spark into a blaze. Vanessa's voice, sharp and calculated, had drifted through the heating vent as she spoke to a lawyer. Once we establish guardianship, their Social Security and pension can be redirected. The doctor's notes on Walter's depression and Evelyn's memory lapses will seal it. Walter had gripped Evelyn's hand so tightly, his knuckles whitened, both of them frozen in the dark, realizing Vanessa wasn't just resentful, she was plotting to strip them of their autonomy and assets. "She's building a case against us," Evelyn whispered, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "We're not safe here." Walter nodded, his jaw set. "We've got to get out before she locks us away in some facility." The decision was made in that moment, but the execution required planning 3 days of careful covert preparation to escape a house that no longer felt like family. Day 1 began with deceptive normalcy. Walter went to the Boise Public Library, where he'd been volunteering to repair books and teach woodworking to kids on weekends. He didn't mention to the librarian, Mrs. Carter, that this might be his last day, but he quietly withdrew $280 from a small account he'd kept secret from Vanessa, earnings from his volunteer stipend. Evelyn, meanwhile, slipped out to a local pawn shop, her heart heavy, as she sold her mother's sapphire brooch and a gold locket Walter had given her on their 20th anniversary. The jeweler, a kind-eyed man named Mr. Ruiz, offered $650 more than she'd hoped, sensing her reluctance. "You sure about this, ma'am?" he asked. Evelyn forced a smile. "Some things are worth more than keepsakes." Back at the house, they moved carefully, avoiding Vanessa's watchful gaze. She was distracted, planning a fundraiser for Lily's school. Her phone calls filled with self-important chatter about catering and guest lists. Michael, as usual, was absent, buried in late-night meetings to salvage his failing construction business. The grandchildren, Lily and Ethan, provided fleeting moments of joy. Lily's after-school hugs, Ethan's excited chatter about a stick he wanted Grandpa to carve into a sword, but even these were tainted by Vanessa's restrictions. "Don't get them too excited before bed," she'd snap, ushering the kids to their rooms. That night, Walter and Evelyn inventoried their resources in whispers: $930 in cash, 2 weeks of medications, photocopies of their IDs, and a thumb drive with family photos. They packed 2 small suitcases, clothes, toiletries, Benjamin's memorial flag, and a single quilt Evelyn couldn't bear to leave. Bailey's leash and a small bag of kibble were tucked into a backpack. "We can't take much," Walter said, his voice thick, "but we'll take enough." Day 2 was about logistics. Evelyn researched bus routes at the library, using a public computer to avoid Vanessa's prying eyes. Boise's Greyhound station offered late-night routes to smaller towns across the northwest Spokane-Missoula Billings. They settled on Red Lodge, Montana, a 4-hour ride costing $38 each, far enough to evade Vanessa's reach, but small enough to stretch their limited funds. Walter, meanwhile, used his library time to call their pharmacy, confirming they could transfer prescriptions to a new location, though without insurance, the costs would be steep $120 a month for Walter's blood pressure meds alone. They debated destinations, weighing warm climates like Arizona against the practicality of staying closer. "Montana's cold in winter," Evelyn noted, "but it's affordable, and nobody will look for us there." Walter agreed, his practical mind already calculating motel costs and food budgets. That evening, they wrote letters to Lily and Ethan, simple notes explaining they were going on an adventure, but would always love them. "We can't tell them the truth," Evelyn said, her pen pausing. "They're too young to understand betrayal." Walter carved a small wooden star for Ethan and folded a paper crane for Lily gifts to leave behind as tokens of their love. Vanessa's behavior grew sharper that day. She complained about Bailey's shedding, moved Evelyn's sewing basket to the garage, and suggested they consider downsizing their belongings further. "This isn't a storage unit," she said, her smile brittle. Michael, overhearing, offered a weak viv. "They're fine," but his voice trailed off under her glare. Day 3 was a masterclass in discretion. Walter and Evelyn maintained their routines. Walter at the library, Evelyn pretending to organize recipes in the guest room, but every action served their escape. Evelyn slipped the children's letters into their backpacks, tucking the wooden star under Ethan's pillow and the crane in Lily's favorite book. Walter confirmed the midnight bus to Red Lodge, memorizing the schedule. Departure at 12:45 a.m., arrival by 5:00 a.m. They packed their suitcases tighter, prioritizing medications and practical clothing over sentimentality. Evelyn's heart ached as she left behind her grandmother's teacup, but she kept one small photo of Benjamin slipped into her coat pocket. That evening, as Vanessa hosted a book club in the living room, her laughter loud and performative, Walter and Evelyn sat silently in their room, waiting for the house to quiet. At 11:30 p.m., with the neighborhood asleep under a starless Idaho sky, they made their move. Walter carried one suitcase, Evelyn, the other, their steps deliberate to avoid creaking floorboards. Bailey, sensing the urgency, stayed close, his leash clipped on in silence. They paused at the children's rooms. Walter placed a hand on Ethan's doorframe. Evelyn whispered a goodbye to Lily's sleeping form. In the kitchen, Walter left his house key on the counter, a final surrender of a space that had never been theirs. The side door clicked shut behind them, and they slipped into the cool June night, the scent of blooming lilacs mingling with their fear and resolve. 6 blocks to the Boise Greyhound station felt like a marathon. Walter's hip ached with each step, but he refused to slow, leaning on Evelyn for balance. Bailey trotted beside them, his ears alert as if guarding their escape. The station was a harsh fluorescent island in the dark, its plastic seats occupied by a handful of weary travelers, a college student with a backpack, a man muttering to himself, a mother soothing a fussy toddler. Evelyn bought 2 tickets to Red Lodge, her hands steady as she handed over $76 in cash. The clerk barely looked up, waving them to the waiting area. They sat in a corner, suitcases between them, Bailey curled at their feet. "We're really doing this," Walter murmured, his voice a mix of disbelief and determination. Evelyn nodded. "We're choosing ourselves." The wait was agonizing, every footstep from security making them flinch, expecting Vanessa to appear, though logic told them she wouldn't notice their absence until morning. At 12:30 a.m., a bus pulled in, its diesel rumble a lifeline. The driver, a woman in her 50s with a name tag reading Rosa, checked their tickets with a tired nod. "No pets." "Unless they're service animals," she said, eyeing Bailey. Walter straightened, summoning conviction. "He's my emotional support dog for PTSD." Rosa raised an eyebrow, but shrugged. "Keep him quiet." They boarded, settling into seats near the back. Bailey tucked under Walter's legs. As the bus pulled away, Evelyn watched Boise's lights fade, the North End's manicured lawns giving way to the anonymous sprawl of the city's edge. "And where to?" "After Red Lodge," Walter asked, his voice low. "Somewhere safe," Evelyn replied. "Somewhere we can be us again." The bus rumbled through the night, its hum a strange comfort after months of tension. Walter dozed fitfully, his head against the window, while Evelyn stayed awake, her mind racing. Their funds, $854 after the tickets, wouldn't last long. A motel might cost $50 a night, food, another $20 a day if they were frugal. 2 weeks, maybe 3, before they'd be destitute. The thought was sobering, but the alternative, staying in Vanessa's house, waiting for her to dismantle their lives, was worse. Around 2:00 a.m., the bus stopped at a rest area in rural Idaho, the driver announcing a 15-minute break. Walter took Bailey to stretch his legs while Evelyn used the restroom, splashing cold water on her face to stay alert. A vending machine, coffee bitter but warm, steadied her nerves. Back on the bus, she noticed a man watching them, a broad-shouldered figure in a flannel shirt, his gray hair cropped short, his face weathered but kind. He nodded as their eyes met, then returned to his map unfolded across his lap like a relic from another era. Something about him felt familiar, though she couldn't place it. When the bus resumed, he moved to a seat closer, his voice low but clear. "You folks look like you're carrying more than luggage," he said, his tone not prying, but observant. Walter tensed, but Evelyn answered cautiously, "Just starting over." The man extended a hand. "Henry Callahan, truck driver. Been on the road 30 years. You don't strike me as the runaway type, but I know the look of folks needing a fresh start." Henry's introduction broke the ice, his straightforward manner disarming their defenses. He was 67, a Vietnam vet who'd driven cross-country since his discharge, his life a series of highways and truck stops. "I'm heading to Red Lodge myself," he said. "Got a delivery there tomorrow. You got a place to stay?" Walter hesitated, but Evelyn, sensing an ally, admitted, "Not yet. We're figuring it out." Henry nodded, as if he'd expected the answer. "Red Lodge is small, maybe 2,000 folks. Quiet, cheap to live, but not much work unless you know where to look." He paused, then added, "I could give you a ride from the bus station to a motel. Save you some cab fare." The offer was tempting, but Walter's pride bristled. "We don't take handouts from strangers." Henry chuckled, unoffended. "Not a handout, just a ride. I've been where you are running from something, not sure what's next. My daughter and I haven't spoken in years because of family nonsense. If I can help someone else avoid that, I will." His story hit a nerve. Evelyn thought of Sarah, distant in London, and Benjamin, gone forever. Walter softened, seeing the parallel. "We'd appreciate the ride," he said finally, "but we'll pay for gas." Henry waved it off. "Just keep that dog from chewing my seats." The bus reached Red Lodge at 4:50 a.m. The sky still dark, the air crisp with the promise of mountain cold. The station was little more than a shelter, with a bench surrounded by pine trees and the faint glow of streetlights. Henry's truck, a weathered but sturdy Ford, waited in the lot. He helped load their suitcases, tossing a blanket into the back seat for Bailey, who hopped in with surprising agility. "He's better behaved than most passengers," Henry said, scratching Bailey's ears. The drive into Red Lodge revealed a sleeping town, brick storefronts from the early 1900s, a courthouse with a clock tower, a neon sign flickering, "Vacancy at the Pineview Motel." Henry pulled into the motel lot, insisting on checking them in. "Ground floor. Easier on your hip," he told Walter, returning with a key and a receipt for $42, including a pet deposit. "Owner's a friend likes dogs." Exhausted Walter and Evelyn thanked him, their words heavy with gratitude they couldn't fully express. "I'm in town till tomorrow," Henry said, handing Walter a slip of paper with his number. "Call if you need me." As his taillights faded, Evelyn felt a flicker of hope. They were houseless, nearly penniless, but free. The motel room, with its faded plaid curtains and lumpy beds, was a temporary haven. Bailey curled up on the rug, and Walter sank onto the mattress, his face etched with fatigue. "What now, Evie?" he asked. She took his hand, her voice firm. "We rest. Then we rebuild." Outside, the Montana dawn began to break, casting pale light over a town that might just become their home. The first rays of sunlight crept through the thin curtains of the Pineview Motel, painting the small room in soft golds and pinks. A stark contrast to the uncertainty that had shadowed Walter and Evelyn Harper's midnight escape from Boise. At 76 and 73, they woke to a world both unfamiliar and strangely promising. The quiet hum of Red Lodge, Montana, seeping into their temporary refuge. The motel room with its worn plaid bedspreads and faint smell of pine cleaner was no match for their lost home on Sycamore Street, but it was theirs for now, a space where no one questioned their competence or eyed their belongings with calculation. Bailey, their 10-year-old golden retriever, stirred at the foot of the bed, his tail thumping softly against the rug as Evelyn rose to make instant coffee from the room's ancient machine. Walter, slower to move due to his aching hip, sat up and rubbed his eyes, the weight of their decision settling anew. "We made it through the night," he said, his voice rough with sleep, but steadier than it had been in months. Evelyn handed him a steaming mug, her silver hair catching the morning light. One night down, countless more to figure out. Their funds, $812 after the motel and bus tickets, loomed as a constant worry, enough for perhaps 2 weeks of frugal living if they stretched every penny. But as they sipped bitter coffee and shared a stale motel muffin, a flicker of resolve burned beneath their exhaustion. They hadn't fled Vanessa's schemes to surrender now. Red Lodge, with its rugged charm and small-town pulse, offered a chance to rebuild, and they intended to seize it. Their first task was practical survival. After settling Bailey with water and kibble, they walked the half-mile to Red Lodge's Main Street, a quaint stretch of brick storefronts and hand-painted signs that seemed frozen in time. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and fresh-baked bread from a nearby cafe. Walter leaned lightly on his cane, his hip protesting, but manageable, while Evelyn kept pace, her eyes scanning the town with a mix of caution and curiosity. They stopped at Red Lodge Pharmacy, a narrow shop with creaky floors, and a friendly pharmacist named Dr. Ellis, who agreed to transfer their prescriptions from Boise. "It'll take a day or two," he said, peering over his glasses. "Without insurance, your blood pressure meds will run about $130 a month. Mrs. Harper's arthritis pills, maybe $90. The numbers stung, but Evelyn nodded, thanking him. Next, they visited First Montana Bank, opening a basic account with $500 of their cash, keeping the rest hidden in Walter's sock for emergencies. The teller, a young woman named Lila, chatted about the town's annual rodeo, her warmth easing their sense of displacement. "You folks retiring here?" she asked. "Exploring options." Evelyn replied, a phrase that was becoming their shield. By noon, their immediate needs addressed, they followed the aroma of coffee to Clara's Cafe, a cozy spot Henry Callahan had mentioned the night before. The cafe, housed in a 1910 building with exposed brick walls and large windows overlooking the town square, buzzed with locals, ranchers in denim retirees sharing gossip, a few tourists snapping photos of the Beartooth Mountains in the distance. Clara Thompson, the cafe's owner, greeted them as they entered, her auburn hair streaked with gray and tied in a practical bun. At 62, she moved with the efficiency of someone who'd spent decades on her feet, her smile warm but assessing. "You must be Henry's friends," she said, wiping her hands on an apron. "He called this morning, said you might need a place to land." Walter and Evelyn exchanged glances, surprised by Henry's continued advocacy. "We're just passing through," Walter said cautiously, but Clara waved a hand. "Nobody passes through Red Lodge without a reason. Grab a booth. Let's talk over coffee." They settled near a window, Bailey curling discreetly under the table, and ordered the day's special grilled cheese with tomato soup, a steal at $6 each. As they ate, Clara joined them, her directness disarming. "Henry says you're good folks in a tough spot. I need help around here. My barista quit last week, moved to Billings for college, and my handyman's out with a bad back. You two got any skills?" Evelyn hesitated, then spoke. "I ran a church kitchen in Willow Creek for 20 years, baked for every fundraiser. Coffee's my specialty, learned to roast beans from my dad." Walter added, "I'm a carpenter by trade, fixed up our old house for decades. I can handle most repairs even with this hip." Clara's eyes lit up. "Here's the deal. I need a morning barista to start at 5:30 a.m., handle coffee and pastries, and a handyman for basic fixes, plumbing, furniture, whatever breaks in this old place. Part-time cash to start $12 an hour each. There's a furnished apartment upstairs, been empty since my niece moved out. Rent's $400 a month, utilities included." Interested. The offer was a lifeline, but Walter's pride bristled. "We're not looking for charity." Clara laughed, a rich sound that filled the booth. "This ain't charity, Mr. Harper. It's a business deal. You work, I pay. The apartment's a perk, saves me the hassle of finding tenants." They asked to see the apartment, and Clara led them up a narrow staircase behind the kitchen. The space was small, but welcoming: a living room with a faded blue sofa and oak coffee table, a compact kitchen with a gas stove, a bedroom with a double bed and cedar dresser, and a bathroom with a clawfoot tub. Sunlight streamed through large windows overlooking the town square, where a gazebo stood, surrounded by flower beds. "It's not fancy," Clara said, "but it's solid. Built in 1910 like the cafe. Good bones." Walter ran a hand along the doorframe, noting the craftsmanship, while Evelyn opened a kitchen cabinet, imagining her baking supplies arranged inside. "We'd need to try it out," Walter said. "A month, see if it works for both sides." Clara nodded. "Fair enough. Move in tonight if you want. I'll show you the ropes tomorrow morning." They returned to the motel to gather their belongings, paying Howard, the owner, for one night, and thanking him for his kindness. Henry Callahan appeared as promised, his truck idling in the lot. "Clara's a straight shooter," he said, helping load their suitcases. "You'll do all right with her." By dusk, they were settled in the apartment, their few possessions unpacked: Benjamin's flag on the dresser, Evelyn's quilt over the sofa, Walter's tools in a corner. Bailey claimed a spot by the window, his nose pressed to the glass, watching Red Lodge settle into evening. "This feels like a beginning," Evelyn said, her voice soft but certain. Walter nodded his hand, finding hers. "Let's make it count." The first week in Red Lodge was a whirlwind of adaptation. Evelyn rose at 4:30 a.m., her body protesting, but her mind sharp, as she learned Clara's coffee recipes: dark roasts, creamy lattes, a house blend with a hint of hazelnut. Customers from grizzled ranchers to young hikers raved about her cappuccinos, and Clara began trusting her to experiment with new blends. Walter tackled the cafe's maintenance: a leaky faucet, a wobbly table, a flickering light fixture, his hands steady, despite the arthritis that flared in the cool mountain air. The work was satisfying, a reminder of their competence after months of Vanessa's subtle diminishment. Their wages, though modest, covered rent and left enough for groceries bought at the local co-op, where prices were kinder than Boise's supermarkets. They stretched their $312 cash reserve, eating simple meals, oatmeal soups, day-old pastries Clara let them take home. The apartment became a haven, its simplicity a contrast to the sterile excess of Michael's house. Evelyn hung a small photo of Lily and Ethan beside Benjamin's, a quiet promise to stay connected. On their first Sunday, they set up a video call with the grandchildren using the cafe's Wi-Fi after closing. Lily's face lit up the screen, her braids swinging as she showed off a drawing. "Grandma, can you teach me to make cookies like you?" she asked. Ethan held up a stick, grinning. "Grandpa, is this good for a sword?" Walter laughed, the sound easing a knot in his chest. Vanessa's voice cut in briefly, curt and controlled. 5 minutes, kids. Homework time." The call ended too soon, but it was a thread to hold on to. Beyond work, Red Lodge began to reveal its heart. Walter and Evelyn joined the library's book club, where retirees debated Steinbeck over coffee, welcoming them without probing their past. At the weekly farmers' market, they bought fresh tomatoes and traded stories, with vendors learning the town's rhythms. Friday night, high school football; Saturday morning, pancake breakfasts at the fire station. Evelyn found a community garden and claimed a small plot, planting rosemary and thyme she'd carried from Sycamore Street. Walter, inspired by a conversation with a local carpenter, started a project to honor Benjamin, a set of wooden benches for the town park, each carved with a subtle mountain motif. "He loved these mountains," Walter told Clara, sanding a plank in the cafe's back room. "It's a way to keep him close." Clara nodded, understanding loss. In her own quiet way, her husband had died a decade ago, leaving her to run the cafe alone. The benches became a community effort, with locals donating wood and kids painting the frames. Walter's hands, though slower than they once were, found purpose again, the ache in his hip lessening with each completed piece. Challenges persisted. Their prescriptions arrived, but the cost, $220 for a month's supply, ate into their savings. Dr. Ellis referred them to a local clinic with sliding scale fees, but without insurance, routine checkups were a luxury. Evelyn noticed Walter's occasional dizziness, a side effect of his medication, and insisted he rest more, though he bristled at the suggestion. "I'm not an invalid, Evie," he'd say, but he'd sit anyway, Bailey's head in his lap. Evelyn's arthritis flared in the mornings, making it harder to knead dough, but she adapted using a mixer Clara provided. They budgeted ruthlessly, skipping dinners out and mending clothes rather than buying new ones. Yet Red Lodge offered unexpected kindnesses. Lila, the bank teller, slipped them a coupon for the co-op. A neighbor, Mrs. Dawson, dropped off a basket of apples from her tree. Henry Callahan stopped by the cafe, sharing stories of his trucker life and checking on their progress. "You're tougher than you look," he told Walter, clapping his shoulder. "Most folks your age would have given up." Henry's own story unfolded over coffee. He'd lost touch with his daughter, Emily, after a bitter divorce, her mother's influence turning her against him. "I send birthday cards every year," he said, his voice heavy. "She's 28 now, lives in Seattle. Maybe one day she'll answer." The parallel to their own fractured family. Sarah in London, Michael under Vanessa's sway, deepened their bond with Henry. A reminder that pain was universal, but so was hope. By the end of their trial month, Clara called them to the cafe's counter after closing. "You've earned your keep," she said, her eyes crinkling. "Customers love Evelyn's coffee. And Walter, you've fixed things I didn't know were broken. Want to make this permanent?" They agreed, signing a simple lease for the apartment and settling into a routine, Evelyn at the espresso machine by 5:30 a.m., Walter with his toolbox by 7:00. The work gave structure to their days, the community a sense of belonging. Evelyn started a weekly baking class for kids at the library, teaching simple recipes like her mother's shortbread. While Walter's benches, 3 completed, 2 more in progress, drew praise at a town council meeting. "You're making Red Lodge better," the mayor said, shaking Walter's hand. The compliment, simple but sincere, was a balm after Vanessa's dismissals. They began saving $50 a month, a small buffer against future uncertainties. Video calls with Lily and Ethan became a Sunday ritual, though Vanessa's presence loomed, her voice sharp when the kids lingered too long. "We'll see them soon." Evelyn told Walter her optimism, a shield against doubt. But as September's chill settled over Red Lodge, bringing golden aspens and early frosts, a new worry surfaced. Winter was coming, and with it, higher heating costs and the risk of Walter's hip worsening in the cold. They needed a long-term plan, not just a season's reprieve. One crisp afternoon, as Evelyn served coffee and Walter tightened a loose chair, Clara approached with a newspaper. "Town's hosting a fall festival next week," she said. "Craft booths, food stalls, music. You two should set up a table. Evelyn's scones and Walter's wood carvings could draw a crowd." The idea sparked something in Evelyn, a chance to contribute beyond the cafe. Walter was skeptical. Who's buying knickknacks from an old man? But agreed when he saw Evelyn's enthusiasm. They spent evenings preparing. Evelyn baked sample batches of lavender scones. Walter carved small, mountain-shaped keychains. The festival, held in the town square, was a vibrant affair, locals in flannel kids chasing balloons, the smell of cider and hay rides in the air. Their booth, modest but colorful, with Evelyn's checkered tablecloth, drew curious visitors. A rancher bought 10 scones for his crew. A tourist couple purchased 3 keychains as souvenirs. By day's end, they'd made $85, enough to cover a week's groceries. More than the money, the interactions, neighbors learning their names, kids asking about Bailey, rooted them deeper in Red Lodge. As they packed up, Clara stopped by, grinning. "Told you this town needs you." Walter looked at Evelyn. Her face flushed with pride, and felt a warmth he hadn't known since Sycamore Street. They were building something here, not just a life, but a legacy, one bench, one scone, one kind word at a time. The first snow of late September dusted Red Lodge, Montana, transforming the small town into a postcard of quiet beauty, with rooftops blanketed in white and the Beartooth Mountains looming like silent guardians under a gray sky. Walter and Evelyn Harper, now settled above Clara's cafe, had found a rhythm in their new life. Their days filled with purpose, Evelyn crafting coffee and pastries, Walter repairing the cafe's aging fixtures and carving benches for the town park in memory of their late son, Benjamin. At 76 and 73, they'd traded the suffocating tension of their son Michael's Boise home for the freedom of independence, however precarious. Their apartment, modest but warm, with Evelyn's quilt and Walter's tools neatly arranged, felt like a home again, and Bailey, their golden retriever, had claimed a sunny spot by the window, his arthritic joints eased by the routine. Their savings, bolstered by part-time wages and $85 from the fall festival, hovered at $420, enough for another month's medications, but not much more. Yet Red Lodge's community had woven them into its fabric. Neighbors waved on Main Street, library book club members saved them seats, and Clara treated them like family. Sunday video calls with their grandchildren Lily and Ethan kept their hearts tethered to Boise, though Vanessa's curt interruptions reminded them of the betrayal that had driven them here. 5 months into their new life, as snowflakes swirled outside, a storm of a different kind arrived, bringing both confrontation and the possibility of healing. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the cafe quieter than usual as the snow kept tourists away. Evelyn was wiping down the espresso machine, her hands steady despite the ache in her fingers, while Walter tightened a loose shelf in the back room. Clara, tallying receipts at the counter, glanced up as the door's bell jingled, admitting a gust of cold air and a tall figure bundled in a parka. The man shook snow from his boots, unwound a scarf, and revealed a face that stopped Evelyn cold. Michael, their son, his eyes weary but searching. Walter emerged from the back, his cane tapping softly, and froze his hand, gripping the doorframe. For a moment, the cafe's warmth seemed to vanish, replaced by the chill of unspoken history. Clara, reading the tension, ushered the lone customer, a rancher nursing coffee, toward the register. "How about a free refill to go Tom Weather's getting rough?" Her tact cleared the space, leaving only the hum of the refrigerator and the faint crackle of the radio. Michael removed his coat, his movements slow, as if afraid to startle them. "Mom, Dad," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I found you!" Evelyn set down her rag, her heart pounding. "How?" she asked, her tone guarded. Michael's gaze dropped to the floor. "A friend of Henry Callahan's, a trucker. He mentioned an elderly couple with a dog headed to Red Lodge. I hired a private investigator to narrow it down. Took months." Walter's jaw tightened. "Why are you here? Michael, Vanessa, send you." Michael shook his head. "I'm alone. She doesn't know I'm here." The words hung heavy, a fragile bridge over months of silence. Evelyn gestured to a booth, and they sat, Bailey nudging Michael's leg with a cautious sniff, as if testing his intentions. Michael's story spilled out over coffee. Evelyn poured from habit, her hands needing something to do. After their midnight escape, Vanessa's reaction had been fury, not concern. Her guardianship plans derailed, her control challenged. She told the kids, "You left because you didn't care." Michael said, his voice breaking. Lily didn't believe it. She said Grandma would never abandon her. "Ethan keeps your wooden star by his bed, Dad." Evelyn's eyes stung, picturing her grandchildren's confusion. Michael continued explaining how he'd uncovered the depth of Vanessa's scheme. She'd been documenting everything: your fall, Dad, your arthritis, Mom claiming they were signs of incompetence. She had a lawyer ready, appointments with our doctor to back her up. She'd already redirected some of your pension to a new account, saying it was for family expenses. When I confronted her, she didn't deny it, said it was for our future since you'd given everything to save our house. Walter's fist clenched. "We gave it to save you and the kids, not to be robbed." Michael nodded, shame etching his face. "I know. I failed you. I was too weak to stand up to her, too scared of losing my marriage. But when you left, it forced me to see her clearly." He paused, sipping coffee to steady himself. "We're separated now. 2 months. I moved out with the kids to a rental in Boise. The court gave us shared custody, but Vanessa's fighting it." The revelation hit Evelyn like a wave she'd braced for worse, expecting Michael to defend Vanessa or demand their return. Instead, he was here alone, seeking forgiveness. "What about Sarah?" Walter asked, their daughter's absence a lingering wound. Michael's expression softened. "She's been trying to reach you." Vanessa intercepted her emails, even her letters, claiming they'd upset the family dynamic. "I found a stack of them in her desk after you left. Sarah's desperate to reconnect. She's planning a visit next summer, when her contract in London ends." Evelyn's breath caught the thought of seeing their daughter after years of distance, a spark of hope. "And the children?" she asked, her voice trembling. "They're here," Michael said, "at the Red Lodge Inn with a neighbor who drove us. I didn't want to bring them until I knew you'd see me." Walter leaned forward, his voice firm but not unkind. "You let Vanessa build a case against us, Michael. You stood by while she pushed us out. Why should we trust you now?" Michael met his father's gaze, unflinching. "You shouldn't. Not yet. I'm not asking for forgiveness, just a chance to make it right. The kids need you. I need you. I want to rebuild what I broke." The raw honesty disarmed Evelyn, and Walter's shoulders softened, though his guard remained. Clara, hovering near the kitchen, caught Evelyn's eye and gave a subtle nod, as if to say the moment was theirs to shape. "Let's see the kids," Evelyn said, her maternal instinct overriding caution. "Bring them here. This is our home now. They should see we're not lost." Michael nodded, relief flickering in his eyes, and left to fetch Lily and Ethan, promising to return within the hour. As the door closed, Walter turned to Evelyn, his expression conflicted. "Are we opening a door we'll regret?" She took his hand, her grip steady. "We're opening a door to family, Walter. Not to Vanessa, but to Michael and the kids. We can set boundaries, protect what we've built here." Clara emerged with fresh coffee, her presence a quiet anchor. "Families are messy," she said, refilling their cups. "Takes guts to try again after a break like that. You two have plenty of those." Her words, simple but true, steadied them as they waited the snow outside, falling thicker now, blanketing Red Lodge in a hush that felt almost sacred. 40 minutes later, the door burst open, and Lily, 6 years old with her dark braids flying, ran straight for Evelyn. "Grandma," she cried, throwing her arms around her. Ethan, 4, followed more cautiously, clutching the wooden star Walter had carved, his eyes wide with wonder. Walter knelt, ignoring his hip's protest, and pulled Ethan into a hug. "You kept my star safe," he said, his voice thick. Ethan nodded solemnly. "I told it you'd come back." Bailey, roused by the commotion, wagged his tail furiously, accepting the children's pats with dignified jum. Michael stood by the door, snow melting on his coat, his eyes glistening as he watched the reunion unfold. The cafe became a sanctuary for the next hour, the children's chatter filling the space with light. Lily showed Evelyn a drawing of a horse, insisting they bake cookies together. Ethan asked Walter to carve a new toy, maybe a dragon, and Walter promised to try. Michael sat quietly, letting the moment belong to his parents and children. But Evelyn noticed his relief, the way his shoulders relaxed for the first time since he'd arrived. Clara, ever practical, suggested a family dinner after closing. "Nothing fancy, but food brings people together," she said, and began preparing a spread pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans, and Evelyn's apple scones for dessert. As the cafe emptied, Henry Callahan arrived with his mother Ellen, an 89-year-old with bright eyes and a sharp wit, despite her occasional confusion. "Heard there was a party," Henry said, winking at Walter. The local carpenter, Samuel Reed, joined them, bringing a small wooden horse he'd crafted for Lily. "Thought it'd match her drawing," he said gruffly, his kindness belying his gruff exterior. The dinner was a patchwork of old and new Red Lodge's community, blending with the Harpers' fractured family. Lily and Ethan giggled as Henry told stories of his trucking days, while Ellen shared memories of Red Lodge's coal mining past, her voice wavering but proud. Michael listened, his silence respectful, as if absorbing the life his parents had built without him. Over dessert, a conversation shifted the evening's tone. Clara mentioned the town's upcoming Thanksgiving potluck, a tradition where locals and strays gathered at the community center. "We're expecting a crowd this year," she said. "Could use extra hands, Evelyn, if you're up for baking." Evelyn agreed, then hesitated. "Our medications are running low and the costs are steep without insurance. Not sure we can swing it much longer." Samuel, overhearing, cleared his throat. "Talked to the mayor yesterday. Town's got a fund for seniors, small, but it helps with medical bills. I put your names in." Walter bristled, his pride flaring. "We don't need handouts." Samuel raised a hand. "It's not a handout. You've given this town benches, coffee, your time. We take care of our own." The gesture, echoed by nods from Clara and Henry, struck Evelyn deeply. Red Lodge wasn't just a refuge. It was a community that valued them not as burdens, but as contributors. Michael, quiet until now, spoke up. "I brought something for you." He stepped outside, returning with 2 boxes from his car photo albums, Walter's specialized chisels, Evelyn's recipe book items Vanessa had stored away. "I thought you'd want these whatever you decided about me," he said. The gesture, small but deliberate, was a step toward amends, a recognition of the life they'd built and lost. As the evening wound down, practicalities emerged. Michael was staying at the Red Lodge Inn for a week, using vacation time to reconnect. He proposed regular visits monthly to start longer during school breaks. "I'm looking at cabins nearby," he said. "Something for weekends so the kids can see you without disrupting your lives." Evelyn glanced at Walter, who nodded slightly. "We'd like that," she said, "but it's on our terms. No surprises, no control." Michael agreed, his relief palpable. He shared Sarah's latest email, forwarded to his phone, promising a summer visit with her husband and new baby. The prospect of reuniting with their daughter, after years of Vanessa's interference, felt like a gift. Lily, drowsy in Evelyn's lap, whispered, "You won't leave again, right?" Evelyn kissed her forehead. "We're here, sweetheart, right above this cafe. You can visit any time." Ethan, clutching his star, added, "Grandpa's dragon." "Better be cool," Walter chuckled, the sound easing the last of the day's tension. As Michael prepared to take the children back to the inn, he paused. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice raw. "I should have protected you." "I'll do better." Walter reached out, squeezing his son's shoulder. "Family's a long road, son. We're still on it." After they left, Clara and the others lingered the cafe, glowing with warmth against the snowy night. "You handled that with grace," Clara said, clearing plates. "Not everyone gets a second chance at family." Henry nodded, his mother dozing beside him. "You reminded me to keep trying with my daughter. Sent her another card today." Samuel, polishing off a scone, added, "Good work starts with honesty. You faced the damage, now you're building stronger." The words resonated, crystallizing the lessons of their journey. Walter and Evelyn climbed to their apartment, Bailey trailing slowly, his tail wagging. In the quiet, they stood by the window, watching snow blanket the town square. "We lost so much," Walter said, his arm around Evelyn. "But look what we found." She nodded, leaning into him. "Community purpose ourselves. And now, maybe family again." Lessons learned, their story carried weight beyond the cafe's walls. Lessons etched in the courage it took to start over. First, resilience knows no age. Walter and Evelyn, at 76 and 73, proved that determination and adaptability could overcome even the deepest betrayals, showing that life's chapters don't end with youth. Second, community is a lifeline. Red Lodge's embrace, from Clara's job offer to Samuel's advocacy, taught that true family extends beyond blood-offering support when biological ties falter. Third, forgiveness is a choice, not a surrender, by opening the door to Michael and the children. They showed that healing requires boundaries and honesty, not erasure of past wrongs, especially for the sake of younger generations. Finally, purpose fuels dignity. Their work at the cafe and contributions to the town restored their sense of value, proving that meaningful work, no matter how small, anchors identity at any age. As Thanksgiving approached, they prepared for the potluck, baking pies and carving decorations, their hands steady with purpose. Red Lodge, once a refuge, was now home, a place where they were seen, needed, and free to write their next chapter together.